Hey guys, welcome back to another week where we talk about all things real estate related. So any questions you guys have about the Ottawa market, about investing, about life as a real estate agent, please put it in the comments below. I'll make sure to make a video about it in the future. And like always, if you're watching on YouTube and you haven't hit the subscribe button yet, make sure you hit it. You make sure you get notified of all our videos coming up. So this week, I want to shoot a video that's long overdue to help answer some of the most frequent questions that I get asked from buyers in our Ottawa market. Then I'm going to take you through what an actual offer consists of and things to be aware of before making an offer on a home. So like I said, one of the most frequent questions that I get are about what we call listing conditions. So a listing condition can be a couple different things, but some of the most common ones that we see in the Ottawa real estate market is holding offers. So no conveyance of offers until a certain date, or holding offers but allowing preemptive offers or bully offers as we call them. In this scenario, what the seller is doing is they know there's a lot of demand for their home, so they want to give a certain time period allowed for everyone to go through the home, and they choose to accept offers at a certain time at a certain day. There's two ways of doing this. One way which they will not look at any offers before that offer date. The other which they will allow a preemptive or a bully offer to come in. If it's an offer that they would like to accept, they will then move up the offer date and give everyone else a chance to submit an offer in time. So I think most people are very familiar with both these scenarios now in the Ottawa market. But now the question that I get asked the most is, what does it mean when I see 24-hour, 36-hour, 48-hour irrevocable on all offers? What this essentially means is how long your offer is good for before it expires. Any offer you make on a house has a certain time frame or irrevocable amount where the seller has to accept that offer by a certain time or that offer is no longer good. So to better explain this, we can go through what an offer or agreement of purchase and sale actually consists of. So when making an offer, there's actually a few things to consider. First, there's always the purchase price. Everyone knows that. But we're also going to have to take a look at the deposit amount. The deposit amount is an amount that's due 24 hours upon acceptance of an offer. That amount is actually deducted from your down payment, so it's money that you're going to have to put down on the house anyways. And it's fully refundable on a conditional offer, but may be subject to forfeit on a firm offer, which we'll get into later. The next part is the irrevocability. And like I said, this essentially says, here are my terms of the offer. You have until this time to accept it or the offer is null and void. Now the irrevocability can go both ways. It can be by the buyer or by the seller. This is how offers are countered. So if a seller receives an offer that they don't like, they can cross out and make it irrevocable by the seller and change the terms of the contract, resubmitting it back to the buyer, giving them the option to accept. When you see sellers asking for a minimum irrevocable period, it can mean a couple different things. One could be that they are in a different time zone and they need time to answer. Another could be that they have multiple owners that all need time to get together and agree on terms. But most commonly what we see in today's market is the sellers are asking for a long irrevocability, so they have the opportunity to tell other buyers they have an offer and create a multiple offer scenario. This is why irrevocability can be so important in making an offer. You want to give the seller enough time to accept the offer, but not enough time to shop it around and create a multiple offer scenario where you get stuck in a bidding war. I should also mention why the deposit is important, because the deposit will show how serious a buyer is. Going back, I should also mention how a deposit can be very important in making an offer. In multiple offer scenarios where sellers are looking at different offers, all very similar, a stronger deposit can show a more likelihood that that buyer will have the ability to actually close on the property. Going back, I should also mention how deposits affect an offer and generally how much they are. Deposits here in Ottawa generally make up at least 1% of the purchase price, making about $5,000 on a regular $500,000 home. In Toronto, we see people give much higher deposits, around 5%, and in Ottawa now we're starting to see people increase that deposit amount. And so why would we see deposit amounts increase in Ottawa? Because of the amount of multiple offer scenarios, where a seller is looking at multiple different offers that are all very similar in price and conditions or closing dates, sometimes the deposit can make the difference. If I'm a seller and I'm looking at two different offers, one that has a $5,000 deposit versus one that has a $10,000 or $20,000 deposit, I'm going to look at that buyer and see that they are more likely to close on that property. The next thing to take a look at is the closing date. Now this can have a huge effect on an offer. Both buyers and sellers are going to have preferred dates on what days they'd actually like to move into that property. About 80% of buyers are actually selling their home. So whether you're a buyer trying to coordinate with the sale of your house or a seller trying to coordinate with the house that you're buying, closing date can be very important. For example, Say we have a seller that doesn't get their new home until December, but the buyer making an offer on that property needs that property in October. If that seller was to accept that offer, they would have to find somewhere else to live for 2 months. As you can imagine, this can have a huge impact on whether that seller is likely to accept that offer or not. I've definitely seen sellers take significantly less than a purchase price that had the closing date that they needed. The next thing to look at an offer is all the chattels included. So this would generally be all the appliances in the home, but could be anything that the buyer and seller agree upon. Sometimes the buyer likes a couch that the seller has in the house, and the seller agrees to include that with the purchase of the home. The next would be fixtures excluded. So say a seller really likes their washer and dryer and they're taking it with them. They're going to put that in the exclusions, and the buyer's going to understand that they're going to need to get their own. In Ottawa, the majority of homes have rental hot water tanks, but they can also include rental furnaces, rental ACs, among other things. So all of these would be the basic components that every single offer consists of. Then we get to Schedule A, where the buyer or seller can add any additional terms into the contract. This is primarily where we get into a conditional versus a firm offer. Traditionally, how real estate is bought and sold is the buyer will make an offer to the seller, including all these terms, conditional on a few different things. Some of the most common conditions can include the buyer having a home inspection, the buyer getting a mortgage. If we're talking about a rural property, the buyer having well or septic inspection or testing the water. If we're talking condos, it can be a status certificate review or a lawyer review. If we're talking condos, it could be a status certificate review or a lawyer review, or it could be conditional on the buyer's sale of their home. But the way things have been going in the Ottawa market the last couple of years, we do not sell real estate the traditional way. What this essentially means is that the buyer is making this offer, and if the seller accepts, that is now a legally binding contract and they have bought the home. So it's up to the buyer to make sure that they get the mortgage and are able to close on time. So it's up to the buyer to make absolutely certain before they make a firm offer that they'll actually be able to get the mortgage and close on the property, and that they're happy with the house as is. But before you think that's crazy and these buyers are putting themselves at huge risk, you have to understand that even though these conditions aren't put in the offer, doesn't necessarily mean that the buyer isn't doing their due diligence and doing these things anyways. We can also work very closely with the mortgage brokers and make sure that they're fully approved before submitting that offer. And I should probably just back up and explain why it is that we're seeing firm offers versus conditional offers. And that simply is that buyers are competing against other buyers instead of negotiating with the seller. When you're just negotiating with the seller, you often have the time to put in the conditions to protect yourself as a buyer. But in a lot of circumstances these days, you're actually not negotiating with the seller, but competing against other buyers. And if the other buyers are making unconditional offers, it makes it very difficult for a seller to accept a conditional offer. I've seen sellers myself take $30,000 less on a firm offer versus a conditional one, because a firm offer is money in the bank, whereas a conditional one can fall apart for many different reasons. Aside from conditions, there's a lot of different things that you can also put in Schedule A. And that's going to include stuff like the appliances are going to be in good working order, the house is going to be left in clean condition before closing, the seller is going to make any certain repairs that you guys agree to. This is where you're also going to see what we call clauses about tenants being assumed versus tenants needing to vacate the property, as well as things like the seller allowing you to do a couple more walkthroughs before the actual closing date. You can create your own and essentially put anything into an offer that you think the seller will agree to. And that pretty much sums up what an offer consists of. And I just want to talk about that because a lot of people think that buyers and sellers are just agreeing on price, but there's a lot of different things that the buyers and sellers can agree to on a purchase and sale of a home. And of course, when we're dealing in such a hot seller's market, there's a lot of things that you can do as a buyer to make your offer more appealing than others. So like always, any questions you guys have, please put it in the comments below. I'll make sure I make a video about it in the future. And thanks again for watching. I'll see you next week.